Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our DocLand honors on day 2 of the DocLands Film Festival. We are so happy you can be here. We have an amazing program for you. And it's like, I would call it a 2-for-1, because you're going to hear from one of the greatest documentary directors or directors in any category, who is a Bay Area resident, but is also a national treasure, and that's Dawn Porter. As Derek and Maureen said, it takes a lot of people to put this program on and all the programs of the California Film Institute. So again, thank you to our members. But there's also the staff and corporate sponsors and other major donors. And tonight's sponsor is an incredible woman that I was very fortunate that I've known her for many decades. And through that time, whether she is initially a volunteer and then a member of the board, and then the board president, and then the board president again, and somebody who's supported whatever program we ask her to support or whatever comes through the pike, she's there for the California Film Institute, and that is Jennifer McCready. Jennifer, can you stand or wave your hand or whatever you prefer? In addition, we have an amazing volunteer board of directors and a staff that is tireless. They do amazing work in every program that we have. And right now, I would like to bring up somebody who's integral to the success and establishment of DocLands, our Director of Programming, Joni Cooper.
Thanks a lot, Mark, and thank you, Jennifer. We're so glad you're on our side. Okay. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the extraordinary work of Dawn Porter. We're so delighted that she was able to be here and for all the films that she has made over the years. The DocLands Honors Award is presented to a filmmaker in recognition of exceptional storytelling within the documentary genre, an artist whose films resonate universally, emphasizing our common humanity, no matter the subject. And I just have to say that she epitomizes the reason for this award, because everything she does is done with such grace, and her filmmaking itself, but also the subjects she chooses are just extraordinary people. And you know, we don't present this award every year, but we do like to seize an opportunity when we see something that is timely and just something that needs to be seen by everybody. And because her films do represent such a common humanity, Dawn, would you come up here and join me? Thank you for coming. I just wanted to present this actual award to you, tangible. It's not online or anything, and it's here with us. It's a beautiful glass sculpture to commemorate this year and this DocLands Honors Award.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We had a funny moment. We have a little joke happening, so I'm sorry you all don't know what it is.
Yeah. We would like to just have a seat and just chat for a few minutes before you all get treated to Dawn's most recent film. Though, Dawn, I know that a lot of people say this, but it's true, you're prolific. So I just want to know if it is your latest film?
It's the latest out.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Perhaps there were others waiting in the wings.
Yes.
So I know it's been a number of years since you got into filmmaking, but I am curious to know, why did you leave law to go into filmmaking?
Do you have to ask that question? First, I'm happy to talk about that. I feel very lucky to have had 3 different careers, really, that all inform one to the other. But I do want to echo the thanks to Mark, to Joni, to our sponsor, to the board, and really to you all, because independent film having an audience is so critical. And coming out and listening and watching together and having the experience of being in the theater, this means the world to us. We always knew it, but we really knew it during lockdown. And so I'm just really, really thankful for you all for coming. And we're so excited to show you this film. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I was a lawyer. I went to Georgetown Law School, and I was not an unhappy lawyer. I was perfectly fine. And there was a personal kind of experience in my life. I think I just turned 30, and my best friend at the firm died. And she died of ovarian cancer, and she was in her 30s. And it was just this shocking experience for me. And I just thought, oh my goodness, it's like that Red Hot Chili Peppers song, like this life is not a run through. And it just kind of like landed so strongly with me that I should challenge myself. I should do the things that were not so safe. So a partner I did a lot of work for, I was a litigator, I did a lot of work for, he worked in First Amendment, we represented some newspapers, and he said, do you want to come with me? So I kind of vowed that the next scary thing that came up, I would say yes to. And this was the big thing. And so my husband came. We were brand new married. We were very happy in Washington, D.C. My family was there. He had just gotten offered the job of his dreams, working for the U.S. Attorney's Office. And he came with me, and we're still married. But I went to work for ABC Television. And I was there as a lawyer for about 1.5 years. And then I did some work for the news division. And then they offered me a job. And the job was network standards, which every network does that differently. But this job, the way that my boss organized it wasn't what can we say legally as a news organization. It is what should we do as journalists. It was all about the ethics. And so, basically my husband would kind of, mock me. He's like, did you watch some more TV today? And I was like, yes, I watched all of the TV. But what we would do is we would do the journalism, kicking the tires on the sources, on the ethics. If, should we say the name of a rape victim? No. What if all the other networks are saying it? Still no. Our ethics are not dependent on what they do across the street. And she was so prescient because she said, if we lose the trust of the audience, where will we be? And so we were always pushing our journalists to remember that they had an obligation to the public, not to a network or advertisers. And so I did that job. I was there at ABC for almost 8 years. And in that time, I saw just how powerful media is. I saw journalism done right. I saw journalism done wrong. And at a certain point, I thought, I could do this. like once you see how the sausage is made, it's like, oh, I could do that. So I went to another network, but then at some point I was like, reality TV was getting really popular, and I thought there were a lot of films about people who look like me, but not by people who look like me. And I thought I had something to say. And so I got introduced to these public defenders, and I took my vacation time and I went to Alabama in the summer, and I begged, borrowed, and stealed, and had people come and lend me their time to film. And it was transformative. I felt immediately at home. I was like, I know what I'm doing here. And all that training as a litigator what you do as a litigator is you ask questions, you write briefs, you make complicated things comprehensible. And all of that is really good training to be a documentary person. It's really about talking to people, empathizing with them, trying to understand, trying to ask questions for the purpose of understanding, not for making points. And so all of that experience informs, what I do now.
Yeah, that's wild, because yeah, how perfect. Like, I always find being able to be curious about everything, and like we were saying earlier, everything I know I learned through documentary film, and it's completely true. I notice kind of a thread. Well, with your films, they all seem to, they're so timely, even today. And I'm sure you didn't.
I should play the lotto.
Yeah. Because even starting with Gideon's Army, do defenders still work that way? That's my thought.
Sadly they do.
Yeah.
And when we moved to San Francisco, I met with Jeff Adachi, and I don't know if any of you are
Yes.
San Francisco. What a great loss as a public defender he is. Yeah, they do. I mean, they're overworked, they're underpaid. It was through making Gideon's Army, so I spent 3 years following public defenders working in the South, and it was their first jobs, and they were just, the first time I met them, they were all talking about the Constitution, and they were talking about helping people, and I thought, this is not what I thought a public defender is, and if I don't know that, I bet a lot of other people don't either. So, it was just such a different world for me to try and experience and understand. And when the film premiered at Sundance, and we got an award and went to HBO, and I'll just never forget this young man stands up in the audience and he says, "I'm a public defender," and the audience went crazy. And he's like, "That never happens." But he said, that the film helped explain to his parents, who were the most important people to him, why he did what he did, why he represented people accused of terrible things. And it was because, this is the protection of democracy. And we don't lock people up without due process, without an effective advocate. And sadly, we do lock a lot of people up without that. But through the film, we helped kind of explain why that job is so necessary.
Yeah. Well, and another one, I watched the film, but I watched the trailer. The trailer says, "riveting, powerful, and timely as hell." And that was your film Trapped in 2013. Where are we now?
I know. Trapped. Trapped is a film, we followed abortion providers in Texas and the Deep South as they were trying to comply with what were then called TRAP laws. And at the time, because the Supreme Court was not going to overrule Roe v. Wade, the strategy of anti-choice people was to try and regulate clinics out of existence. And they were making a lot of progress. So we just took cameras and we went to all these different abortion clinics. And, I remember John Oliver did a piece. I had met John Oliver. When I did Gideon's Army, I was on the Daily Show, and it was supposed to be Jon Stewart, and then he decided to go on a break. And I was like, what? He's going on a break? It's my big break, and he's going on a break. And there was this guy that nobody knew called John Oliver. And I was like, shoot. So we're sitting and I'm talking with him. And then afterward, he said, "That was my first serious interview." I was like, what? But we kind of stayed friendly. I can text him right now. And he heard about Trapped and he asked me to send it to him. And I did. And he did a whole hour on the film. And so this was before it came out. It was right after Sundance. This also was at Sundance, but before it was broadcast on PBS. And in between that time, in March, there was a big rally at the Supreme Court. And so I went, and a number of people from the film and advocates went, and we get there, and there's all these signs with quotes from the movie. And it's because they saw it on John Oliver. millions of people saw it on the John Oliver show. And so you see, you know, and it was like young women with those signs, like, I'm not going to be sentenced to motherhood, like things that our abortion providers had been trying to explain. And so I don't know, we never could have imagined, well, that's not true. Working with the lawyers, and you know, this is where like the background in law comes. Like, I originally was like, I'm just going to follow the lawyers, like not the providers. And then I was like, I'm going to follow people that do the abortions. You know, the first interview I did with one lawyer, and she pointed to a map, and she's like, one of these cases is going to the Supremes. And she's like, we're not sure which one, but if you follow all of those, one of those cases are going to make it to the Supreme Court and it sure did. And so the film came out. You know, I think it was definitely part of the conversation, which is, you know, pretty incredible. And I remember I was taking a walk on the day. So the Supreme Court is so archaic in so many ways. And the way that you find out decisions still today is you have to refresh the SCOTUS blog. So, you know, we're all refreshing to see when the decision comes out. And I was so anxious and nervous. And this was like, were they going to overturn Roe? And so I'm walking and I refresh, and then it's like spinning. And then I read, and I just like scroll down like from my lawyer days, and it was like, you know, the lower court decision was overturned and Roe was safe. And so, but as we all know, that was temporary. So
Unbelievably so.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other film that of yours that I watched was The Way I See It with Pete Souza. And I mean, I was in tears just
Thank you.
because it was just amazing to be back in those days and in the Obama administration and seeing that. And I loved the way that you had him tell the story. Again, a film that the subject tells its own story, but through photographs.
So this is a film about President Obama's White House photographer, Pete Souza, and some of you may follow his Instagram or Twitter. And so Pete, I met Pete with producer Evan Hayes and Laura Dern, and they said, come meet Pete. And I was actually working on John Lewis' Good Trouble, and I was like, I have no business doing another movie right now. And they said, just come meet Pete. So Pete comes to Laura Dern's conference room, and we're sitting there, and he just flips open his laptop, and he does like a slideshow, like an like he might as well have had a mimeograph machine. It was so not fancy. And he does one at a time, and he just starts telling the story behind some of his favorite pictures. That's it. And by the end of his sitting in a conference room with fluorescent lights, and he's just clicking through pictures, we're all crying in a conference room. And so I was like, we should really make this movie. And so the idea is, so Pete was also Reagan's White House photographer as a young guy. And that experience, he was very influenced by President Johnson's White House photographer. President Johnson's White House photographer, which is, as you will see, why we have so many beautiful, evocative, personal images from inside the White House that are not staged. And that's what Pete wanted to do when he was both with Reagan, but then also with President Obama. And so President Obama, he took more than 2 million photos during his time in 8 years in the White House. And so we got it down. And actually, Ben, who is the editor of this film, we have worked together for a long time and can tell you all about all of Pete's photos because we worked together on that. And he was the assistant editor, and he got a promotion. But you know, making that film, it's not about President Obama as much as I am an admirer of his leadership. It's about like qualities you need in a leader. It's about empathy and doing your best and caring about your, I was about to say your subjects. I guess I'm influenced by the coronation. But it's actually about democracy. It's about what we need, and that's regardless of party, And Pete says, he would not have wanted to do these talks if like Mitt Romney was in the White House, because he wouldn't be fearing for the loss of democratic norms. And that is really what inspired him, is the former president's abuse of the democratic process. And so we made that film. And one funny story is we were in lockdown. And so, of course, the film comes out and it's just not able to be seen the way we want in theaters with people talking to people. That was what we had always imagined. So we always go to Martha's Vineyard. So we're in Martha's Vineyard during lockdown. And long story short, but I have a friend of mine is a very close friend with Michelle Obama. And she had seen the movie and she said, oh, I wish she could see it. And I was like, well, she can. So I said, why don't you invite her and we'll, get a theater on the Vineyard, because it's a small town and it costs literally $500. I was like, I think Focus Features will spring for the $500. And she's like, I don't know. She's not going to want to, they don't like to, I was like, all right. And then I get this text from Obama's assistant. And they're like, Mr. and Mrs. Obama would be delighted to join you for, so the deal was like, no audience people for Secret Service. So they brought 16 of their friends. It was a theater like this, and they watched the movie with us. And, they were so moved. And their daughter was there, and she's crying because it really was, it's such a unique experience to have. And for them, it was a reminder, when you sit back and see what a difference you've made, when you're in it, it's hard to tell. But when you sit back and you see some of those moments, so that was really, so that movie ended up being on MSNBC, and it was their all-time #1 non-news programming. So like a lot of people watch that.
Yeah, it's a goodie. And of course, you were doing the John Lewis film at the same time, which is a feat in itself, doing the two films. But the parallels, with John Lewis, I just thought to be able to see him sitting and watching his life flash before his eyes in a way, and tell his own story there too.
Yeah,
fascinating.
I got to travel with Congressman Lewis for a year, and this was 2018, so this was before the midterms, and he was running unopposed, so he was campaigning for other people because he's John Lewis. So John Lewis was an incredibly optimistic person, just incredibly optimistic. And this was like really the dark Trump years. And we were following him. We went into this museum that's a civil rights museum, and I walk in with him, and the first thing you see is a large picture of him, an archive of him. And we're just watching it together, and he's watching it, and there's like a high school tour group next to us. And he turns to this kid who's on a high school tour. Can you imagine you're going to a high school tour and you're like, that's you, in that. And he says to this kid, I can't believe that's me. I can't believe, sometimes I look at that and I don't believe that I did that. And he was so honest and open with this kid. And so it gave me the idea, we made all these small movies of his life, of just archive. And I sat him in front of the camera and I was like, Mr. Lewis, just tell me about that moment. And so he would say, that was who I sat next to. I was really afraid. He would really give you some texture, because we all just knew John Lewis when it all worked out. You don't know when you're in it and you're not sure it's going to work out. And he said so many times, he's like, you only have one time around, and so you got to give it all you have. And he said, and if I die, I'll die peaceful and knowing I tried and did my best. And so, we did not know he was sick at the time. He was fine. We couldn't keep up with him. And it was February 2020, right before lockdown, but he was really sick. And I was worried that he wasn't going to see it. So I flew to Washington, D.C., went to his house, and he opened the door. and he was all dressed, which I was, it was always a joke of ours that he was like, I always be like, Mr. Lewis, can we meet at, 7 a.m.? And he'd be like, sure. And he'd be like in a suit. And I was like, Mr. Lewis, can we meet at 11 p.m.? Sure. And he'd be in a suit. And so I knew he was really sick, so I didn't expect much. And he opens the door in a suit, and we just both laughed. And we watched the film together on my laptop. Wow. And he just said, it's so powerful. And I said, your life is so powerful. And we just had that afternoon together, but that was the last time I saw him. So.
Oh, more tears. Yeah. Well, what I have seen, following through some of your films a little bit, a couple of things being, I love the way you have subjects tell their own story, and I love the subjects that you choose. I mean, empathy just runs amok through them, and just people doing good things. And so seeing the Lady Bird Diaries seems an extension in this one, nothing but her story, right?
This film, I love this movie. I hope you do too. ABC, I had worked with Jackie Glover, who's a fantastic executive. She was at HBO for many years. She commissioned my very first movie, and she called me up and she said, we have this podcast. She was working for ABC News, kind of also full circle. She said, we have this podcast, Lady Bird Diaries. What do you think? You think it could be a movie? And I was like, I don't know. So I listened to the podcast and poked around. And, as the research, we started getting research into it. And Kim Reynolds is here, produced it, and Ben Zweig, who edited the film. And, we all noticed, we'll talk about this more when we did the archival research, there was very little, if you just put in the search term Lady Bird Johnson, very little, like nothing, like 2 pages of material. Like, that's not possible. She was the first lady. If you put in Mrs. Johnson or President's wife, right? She shall remain nameless. You get a little bit more. And then there was more footage that didn't even mention her, even though she was prominently displayed in the footage. And so, watching that and thinking about it and hearing the diaries, and I was just like, you know what? She gets to tell her story. This is not the story of civil rights or the Johnson administration. It is her story as an occupant of the White House, as the really underestimated First Lady of the United States. And so, let's let her say what she wants to say, and we can experience it. And then when you married it with the archive, I think that there are some surprising things that I hope you enjoy.
Yes, and with that note, we'll let you watch the film, and Dawn and Kim Reynolds and I will be back for Q&A after.
Thank you so much.
Anyway, I'd like to invite Dawn back, and with her producer, Kim Reynolds. Make yourselves comfortable. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it was just such an amazing way to tell a story through her own words, without anything. Well, first of all, how did you learn about the tapes? And because you didn't
Nope.
really know anything about her.
No idea. Jackie Glover let us know about the podcast, which is a great podcast. I encourage you all to listen to it. It's really riveting. And so that's, where we first came in contact with the tapes. And Kim also was a producer on a mental health series I worked on with Oprah and Prince Harry, and love working with her. And I really trust her opinion. And so I was like, can you listen too? And pretty quickly, I think I was like, no talking heads. I was like, let's do something different. Let's just challenge ourselves. And it wasn't easy. I mean, Ben, our editor, is here. Ben, if you want to wave and stand up.
Stand up, Ben.
But really, it's, nobody makes a film by themselves. And so it was this constant conversation. And the way I really like to work is by starting little sequences at a time. And then you start to put them together and you think like, oh, this can happen. But, it was a big challenge, but I think like challenges are good. Like it makes you not be a lazy filmmaker. It did mean there were things we had to leave out that we loved. Like if you went to
Like
the
what?
homemaker.
Yeah, I mean, she was really ahead of her time in a lot of topics. History does not remember her as a feminist, but she actually gave a speech at a home economics forum in 1964. So it was pretty soon after they came into the presidency, and she's basically telling women to make their own money and get out of the house and don't rely on a man. And it got the transcript of the speech is amazing, but it didn't get any press. So there was nothing to show for it. But when you're looking at it, you're like, she said this? Talking about birth control, like in other speeches, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, amazing stuff. Now, so you two work together a lot then?
Yes.
Have worked together a lot.
Yes, we did this. We did, so the mental health series is a 5-part series for Apple TV. And Kim was one of the lead producers on that series. And then I finally was like begging her to work with me all the time. So now she works full time at Trilogy Films.
Fantastic.
She's stuck with me now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, she was certainly no shrinking violet, and it really goes to show what goes on. Like, what was the line? Something about her beautification projects, which are really incredibly conservationist.
She was a conservationist. She was, you see that, growing up in Texas and having appreciation for the natural world. And, she's so not given credit. And sometimes Johnson isn't even given credit for what they were doing in reaching out, to Walter Washington. DC was a very segregated town. And so it was really significant that she was working with him, side by side, and what they call beautification in an area my parents live in now. Really, like if you go to DC now and you see all those beautiful trees and flowers, like that's Lady Bird, so she's just not, but it was a very strategic plan, as you see, and like all the work that went into it.
Yeah, she knew she couldn't come out too strong, so she even says, if I have to talk about wildflowers and, billboards to get people to, talk about this, then I will. But it was really part of a much, there's, diary entries where she's talking about urban renewal and things along those lines. So it's just pretty incredible that she was talking about it then.
And using that language,
I mean, in the part where she's talking about the connection between mental health and poverty, it's like, you don't even really hear people talk. Just now you're hearing people, bring that up.
That's incredible. The one thing that Kim did supply, she gave us some slides because Lady Bird had quite a connection with Northern California. Huh?
She did. So she first came here September of 1966. It was a solo trip. And, she went to Monterey and Point Reyes, and she actually gave a speech at Point Reyes where she's talking about the need to protect our seashores. And another part of it, when she was in San Francisco, she saw Ghirardelli Square and was like, who designed that? And found Lawrence Halprin, who she brought to DC to help design certain parts of the DC waterfront, which actually didn't happen because they couldn't get the funding. But she was like, who's that guy? Bring him here.
Do you have those slides that we can show?
Oh, there we go. So there's Lady Bird looking at the coast.
Do you know where that was?
This might be Monterey, because I'm thinking of the outfits. This, I believe, wasn't her at Point Reyes. If anybody knows by looking at this.
Yeah. Okay, next.
So this is her and her Secret Service agents.
That's a plus.
And I just love the little knee pop here. So yeah, we just thought this was a fun picture to include. So again, yeah, this is her somewhere around these parts. Is that Monterey?
Point Reyes?
So this is actually her at the Redwoods, and there is a grove named after her. So yeah, I love this picture of her.
Right. So Redwood National
Yeah,
Park.
Redwood National Park, yeah. I think that's all the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see that she really does have had some connection with this part of the world, and she loved it. Hey? Yeah.
Yeah, and she was inspired by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Has anybody got a question they'd like to ask after watching all that history? Aha, we do have some questions.
This is along the lines of the favorite things that you didn't get to include, but in the trove of phone calls, I know that was a lot of material. So what was that winnowing process like?
Because there's so many hours of recordings, one of the most important things you can do is kind of edit your topics. And so I'm interested in women's rights, I'm interested in race, and politics. So those are, three. And then also because I'd made Bobby Kennedy for President, made a film about John Lewis, I had the experience of looking at the same period of history through three different personal lenses. And so I was also just really interested in, obviously Bobby Kennedy's death, but places where I know that he that were meaningful to him. So we were looking for phone calls that spoke to the scenes that we were interested in building, because there's so many things that we could have, kind of gone off of. She was quite a pop culture, Gunsmoke is Kim's favorite. There's a lot about Gunsmoke.
Yeah. A lot. I would say, Ben, maybe 80% of the diary recordings have Gunsmoke in them. Some way, but yeah, I think on the phone calls, there was a lot of really funny phone calls between the two of them that had nothing to do with anything, just husband, wife. He wanted to go for a walk around the property, and she's like, "I can't, Lyndon, I'm going to the foot doctor." It's they're just silly, but it's how do you
regular people?
Yeah, yeah.
So, there's someone right.
Hi, wonderful film. Thank you so much. I was just curious if you spoke to Robert Caro and if he offered anything to your project.
No.
There are strong feelings about Robert Caro here. Obviously, an incredibly important chronicler of history, but when you read his books, I hope you'll read them differently and notice what's missing, which is her intense contributions. One thing I like to point out to people is there was no plan of succession when Kennedy was killed. And so there was no vice president for that first year. And so he had his own kitchen cabinet, which was literally the person in his kitchen, and that included Lady Bird. So she was present for all of these really significant meetings and decisions and strategy sessions. So she didn't just, randomly critique his speeches. She was really an integral strategy confidant and person. So I've got nothing against Robert Caro. Kimmer.
No, I think to the vice president part, during those early months, the press actually started referring to her as Mrs. Vice President.
But a little pejoratively.
Yeah.
A little know your place, who could forget Hillary Clinton in healthcare? Who could forget, Michelle Obama as a double Ivy League graduate who ran a hospital system and got so much pushback for, anything intellectual that they would do. And that, it's not an accident that I think Jill Biden is the first lady with outside employment. And I love that she has outside employment and admire her tremendously, but she's a teacher, and that's acceptable woman's work. And I think it's not an accident that, that she's allowed to pursue that work. And so it's so interesting. We would not have an East Wing paid women, paid staff for the First Lady if it was not for Lady Bird insisting.
Yeah, she was the first First Lady to have
staff. She was she invited the female press to the White House. You see Barbara Walters in the footage. So there's so much that she did quietly and without attribution that's for the good of the country. And she saw that it wasn't just about her own time in office, it was about establishing a precedent for that happening.
Very cool.
Hi, that was a fabulous film. I'm a big fan of documentaries, and I was curious whether or not there are any living family members that have seen this or had any opinions or contributions or concerns, anything at all.
Yeah. The family had no contributions. We made them aware that we were making the film. This premiered at South by Southwest this year. And Lucy Johnson came and invited 26 other members of the Johnson family to come to the premiere, which was extremely nerve-wracking for all of us because they had not seen it at all. And it was really, really emotional screening. And Lucy stood up, and mercifully Ben recorded it, and she was crying. And one of the things that we we're not really that focused on is at the end, because we end when they leave the White House. But Lady Bird had a stroke at the end of her life, and so she couldn't speak. And so for her family, particularly for all of her grandchildren, to be able to hear her uninterrupted was, I also was particularly pleased because, we cover the 2 weddings. And to hear Lady Bird say, imagine being the daughter and you hear your mother saying, your very distracted father paid complete attention, at the weddings. So the family is there. They've been wonderfully supportive, as have the Johnson Libraries in supporting the project. So we filmed her dresses, and then we're all geeks, and we went and took a tour of the library, and we're like the only people photographing her dresses and things. So.
But, I think Lucy Johnson, when she stood up, she said, "Thank you for giving my mother the opportunity to have the last word." And I think that was that's all you could ask for. Linda Johnson is coming to a screening next month in DC, so another nerve-wracking one.
Great.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Steve, and back in September of 1966, my dad took me and my brother Bob out to Point Reyes National Seashore, and I think it was September 20th or 21st, 1966, and we got to see Lady Bird Johnson speak out there at the dedication of the National Seashore, and California Governor Pat Brown was there, and Interior Secretary Stuart Udall was there too. So it was a beautiful fall afternoon that day. It was unusually warm that day too at the Point Reyes National Seashore. Thank you, Lady Bird Johnson. Thank you.
So I'm one of the protesters that was screaming, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today?" So it was very moving to me. One of the highlights of it, first of all, everything about it was moving to me. Maybe because I lived, like you said, the perspective of having those years that we experienced. But the part about his depression and their empathy towards him and his empathy towards human beings totally escaped my attention all these years. But that was something that was never reported that I know of, and it humanized him so much. And it's really so tragic that even now, with Fetterman, we had just an example recently. It's like, it's amazing that Fetterman was able to speak about this publicly, but the president. And I like to look at pictures of Obama when I first saw him and after he emerged from the White House, and the same thing with LBJ, just
Gray hair,
broke,
yeah.
really melted in front of you. So I just wanted to ask about what you thought about that part.
That's one of my favorite parts of the film, and not only because it's revelatory, which it is, but there's a line where she has, "But how to get a moment of quiet when you are the president of the United States." And I think it's, you wish that they had been able to have some support and have him have some rest. And it did make me think, it's that on steroids now, with like the news cycles and just like all of the problems that come. But I was heartened by Senator Fetterman's announcing going to seek treatment, staying, hopefully as long as he needed, and that the country met it with support. Most of the things that I read, but I agree with you. I feel like it's one of the most moving and revelatory. And Lady Bird is a very intentional person. One of the things she does not talk about are LBJ's alleged affairs, and she doesn't say a word in all of her, and she was talking about everything. Yeah. So we kept waiting for some, but Kim can tell the story of what she does say.
There's one recording when she's like, "Well, you never know who's going to be in Lyndon's bedroom. I walked in and there was Nixon." So it's like, that was,
So we tried. That was another thing we left out. We're like, can we make something of this? But we're like, the context it's probably going to get lost.
Yeah. I think we've got
I grew up in those years. I came of age in those years. And what was most moving to me about the film, and I'd like to hear you talk about this a little bit, is those were the Johnson presidency were probably the most fraught years in modern history, culminating with 1968, which was until 2020 the most terrible year in modern history. And yet, I even remember Lady Bird having so much grace, and you really captured that in how, in all that anguish and chaos and death, she persevered with her environmental activism, her humanitarian work, and her devotion to her family, and that really shone through in the film. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. I, as a working mother, I really appreciated that she prioritized her children as much as her intellectual and political activities. I think what comes through is that the Johnsons, despite whatever extracurricular affairs the president was engaging in, had a very strong marriage, a partnership. And they both had what I think is emblematic of true public servants, which is they were always thinking of not just the immediate, but the long term. And that was another thing that attracted me to this film, is that when we look at politicians today, the people I'm interested in are people who are thinking about what's going to happen to the generation next, and not just what's the politically expedient thing to do today. And I think that the Johnsons were very much, I'm working on a series about the Supreme Court now, and Johnson was so strategic in his elevation of Thurgood Marshall. The first thing he did was have Marshall become Solicitor General. And Marshall, by that time, had won 29 of 32 cases that he had argued, civil rights cases, before the Supreme Court. He was the winningest litigator in history. And Johnson said, I'm going to make you Solicitor General. You're going to be the lawyer for the United States of America. It's going to be a black man in the 1960s. And you're going to, and then Marshall goes on to win another, 24 cases. So what Johnson is thinking then is they're never going to be able to say Thurgood Marshall is not qualified. He was going to eliminate that as a criticism of Marshall. And then, of course, he elevates him to the Supreme Court. So I think you're right in that they are both always doing the balance of, family, that tight-knit circle, but then thinking about strategically. You can't just only, and it is so tragic that Vietnam, that those decisions were not good decisions. I mean, he certainly inherited a difficult situation, but then, escalating the war, and with all the good that Johnson did, Vietnam really undermined, his legacy, and it's obviously more than a fair criticism of the presidency.
Yeah, okay, we have time for one more question.
Hi, congratulations on a wonderful film and Inside Out, letting her speak in that way. I want to go back, one of the things that struck me in the film, I had some personal experience. 1965, I think Lady Bird alluded to how Lyndon had approved increasing enrollment in the military from 75,000 to 125,000, something like that. Mm-hmm. Well, I happened to be in the car in the San Fernando Valley, 4 p.m, Southern California, driving with the radio on. We interrupt this program to put the President of the United States on. And LBJ mentioned, as of midnight tonight, August 26, 1965, anyone not married legally in whatever state that they are in, marriage will no longer be a deferment from military service. And I'm just wondering if Lady Bird, in any of the recordings and anything, shared any part of that with Lyndon, how that played out at all.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think she talked about that, specifically. Obviously, that summer there was a lot going on, as we saw, like, Medicare and a bunch of other things that had passed. But yeah, she didn't, she mostly talked about, him just agonizing over this decision. And he had really bad nightmares and would scream in the middle of the night and wasn't sleeping. So she talked more about, the effects that it was having on him emotionally than really what the nitty gritty of the certain, that were behind the numbers or anything like that.
And then, of course, his son-in-law is going to war.
Both of them went to war. Yeah.
And so, they were among the families that were, experiencing, Vietnam, sending a child into battle.
I think the footage that we have, it always gets me of Chuck going off to war and Linda, giving him brownies. So it's just like, it's like that poor girl, her husband's going to Vietnam and all those cameras were in her face, so.
Well, thank you very much, Dawn and Kim. Wonderful film. And we'll all look forward to your next Supreme Court, eh? I heard that. Yeah.
And this will be on Hulu in the fall, so.
Yeah.
Tell all your friends.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.